Well, thank you everyone so much for being here this evening. I'm so glad to have the opportunity to present to you. It's been a few years, so I'm sure there's a few familiar faces, but I think some of the parents I saw last time probably have kids graduated by now, and so maybe some of you are new. I want you to know that in the context of doing the workplace drug and alcohol testing for many years, we also, a huge part of our program that we did locally was student drug testing, mostly for athletes in our public schools who choose to do extracurricular activities. Therefore, they often choose to sign contracts to remain drug-free, and sometimes for disciplinary committees and things like that. So we were very involved in school testing at the time. Just prior to that work that I did in the state, I was the program manager for Safe to Tell in the state of Colorado. So if you're familiar with Safe to Tell, I worked there for 5 years. And the only reason I mention that is because a lot of what I've done in the field of prevention and drug and alcohol testing and all of that really kind of culminates and comes together in my heart and passion for helping parents to understand what is impacting our kids, how we can help them make healthy choices, and that type of thing, right? So let's go ahead and get started because I do have a lot of material to cover. And then also because I want to make sure we have enough time for questions and answers at the end. So you can either type those into the chat box and they'll be kept track of, or just write them down on a piece of paper in front of you. And when we get to the end, I'll try to answer as many of those questions as I can. So what I was asked to address tonight is, how is Colorado's marijuana program impacting your family? And what we're going to cover is, how has our legal marijuana program lived up to the promises that were made to the voters? Do your children indeed have less access to marijuana as was promised us? Is the tax revenue helping schools, which is what voters wanted it to do? And are our children more educated about the harms and risks associated? And how can we tell? How do we know that information? So I think the first thing to start off with that made sense to me was to take a look at what were the promises that were made. So of course, it's always billions of dollars in tax revenue. And I hear this as I travel around the country and even sometimes around the world is, yes, but I don't hear you complaining, Joe, about all the billions and billions of dollars that Colorado is getting for that tax revenue. People really are under the impression that we are all swimming in cash. How many of you have that cash in your back pocket right now? Raise your hand. No, okay. So there's a perception that we are like one of the wealthiest states in the nation because of the marijuana revenues. So we will tackle that piece really later on in the presentation. But one of the promises that was really popular was this: the recreational marijuana system will create less access for children, because the only way to get marijuana will be to go into a store and you'll have to show your ID. And then because of that, no child will be able to get their hands on marijuana. So some said less access, others said absolutely no access for children. Now, in light of that, not a lot of people said, then why are you allowing folks to grow in their own home? Because when you grow in your own home, of course, children have access. So, that's something that we didn't really clearly think through. We sort of created this dual system, but let's go on to the next one. That marijuana would be completely regulated and controlled in a system like alcohol. What I find kind of humorous about this is that we have a highly regulated system in tobacco. We have a highly regulated system in alcohol, yet it continues to be the most costly and damaging addictive substance in our society. Tobacco is the #1 product sold on the black market in the United States for decades now, even though it's perfectly legal. And then but it's because we tax it. And so the tax rates, people are always trying to get black market tobacco products. And then thirdly, the third highest regulated substance in the United States are opioids. And yet here we still have like the worst opioids crisis we've ever seen in our nation. So, you know, the argument of, well, we just tax and regulate it, we'll get this thing under control and then it will not be a problem. We didn't really, you know, take into account historically how well we've done there on in other areas. But you know, it is what it is. Here we are. And then we had the proponent side saying we will completely eliminate the black market. So the black market would be the person basically selling on the street. So they're like, nobody will have to go down a dark alley anymore, put themselves in a dangerous situation with a drug dealer that, you know, may hurt them or harm them. You will know what's in the substance. You're not just going to get something unknown that could be laced with something else. And what we have found is that, you know, that actually wasn't really how things were happening at the moment, but we'll take a short look at that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I'll address that one briefly. And then finally, free up law enforcement to deal with real crime, so that they're not just arresting everybody on the street who lights up a joint. So some of these things may provoke you to ask questions of me, and I welcome them. So don't hesitate to ask me anything you'd like. So let's see how we're doing. I want to really focus specifically on how this is affecting families and children. And the first thing that I want you to really understand about where we are today with what I call today's contemporary marijuana products is how I refer to them. Back in the 60s and 70s, like the Woodstock days when, you know, people said marijuana is relatively harmless. What's the harm in just having a little joint? Which is really where the legalization movement was birthed, is back in that day. The THC in cannabis was approximately 1 to 3% of the plant's entire property construct, right? And at that time, CBD, so you see CBD everywhere, right? 7-Eleven, King Soopers, wherever you go, someone is selling a CBD product. That stands for cannabidiol, and that is the property of cannabis that has that potential for some medical benefit. Well, back in the 60s and 70s, the CBD and the THC were in equal amounts. And so what you have in that plant is when those two substances are equal, they balance each other out. Cannabidiol will actually combat the high of the THC. And then the THC banks some of that medicinal effect. So they kind of rub against each other, so to speak. Now, they're friends when it's 1 to 3%. But what happens when you take THC up over that 3%, all of a sudden the CBD drops down drastically. Likewise, when you get the CBD high, the THC has a tendency to drop down. Now that's in a natural plant, okay? So we started, of course, seeing people figure out that they could breed and genetically modify their cannabis plants. If any of you were familiar with High Times magazine when you were in high school back in the day, it's still thriving and going strong. And so hybridization and modification of these plants is still all the rage, of course. When we legalized marijuana in Colorado in 2012, our mayor was on the radio saying, oh my gosh, people are, you know, natural plant in Colorado is already at 12 to 15%. That's far more than what it was back in the 60s and 70s. So this is not the same product. I dare to say that we are at a day and age where you can't even find 12 to 15% of anything in the state of Colorado anymore. That's just not how we play this game. There are far other things that are going on. So I also want to mention, as I talk to you about potencies, that the first documented cases of cannabis dependence disorder in the psychological diagnostics criteria manual that it's given to treatment providers, was noted when cannabis went over 5% THC back in the 80s. So in the 80s, when we went to 5%, that's when we saw people having actual symptoms of addiction, which is what dependence means, and then having to be treated for it. So when you hear people say it's harmless because it's not addictive, if it is addictive, it's only psychological. I have personally watched people withdraw off of high potency cannabis, and it is incredibly similar to withdrawing from heroin. Now you might think, oh my gosh, there's no way that could be true. That's just ridiculous. Well, if that thought just went through your head, I want you to bear with me because I will explain what I'm talking about. So on the left side of your screen, you'll see some cannabis plants that were seized by the DEA, or the Drug Enforcement Agency, back in the 70s. And this was considered a huge bust on federal property, tons of plants, and they recorded and took these pictures because the plants were so huge. This is kind of laughable compared to today's standards, where if you look to the right, that is more like what cannabis looks like today. If the DEA has to go and do a seizure, for instance, on federal land, a lot of cartels come into our country and they go onto federal property, which means like our federal park systems, and they start grows because they can do them in heavily treated areas undetected. When DEA finds those things and they go to seize the plants and get them out of there and make sure they don't destroy our beautiful park property, they have to take them out with chainsaws because they're trees. They're not just little wispy plants. I was on a tour of a facility, a grow facility in Denver a couple of years ago. I was invited to come help some people from out of state go on a tour and ask questions of our system that we have. And at that time, if I said the name of the particular retail store that I was in, you would all know the name. You've all seen it. You're all, there's locations here in town. I was standing in a room looking at buds, the buds being the flower, portion of the plant, usually maybe the size of someone's fist. I was looking at buds that were the length from my fingertips to my shoulders. And if you hold out your hand and think about that little tiny fist bud being from your shoulder to your fingertips, I was gaping at this thing. The buds were being held up by 2x4s because they were so huge. And the owner came over to me and he goes, "That's pretty impressive, isn't it?" And I said, "It looks like something prehistoric. I mean, I've never seen anything like it." And he goes, "That's nothing. I've got a room in the back that you can't have access to, where the buds are as tall as you are from head to toe." And I'm 5'6". So he was telling me he had buds that were between 5'6" and 6 feet tall. That's not natural. All right. That's not natural. That is not what our voters intended when they said, let's control it, let's tax it, let's regulate it, and make sure kids can't get it. What we did is we commercialized it. And so now we have these products that are not only huge, but they're being genetically modified in other ways as well. So the potencies that we have now, even in natural plants, just the natural plants alone, are around 30%. 10 years ago, they said you couldn't even grow a plant over 25% because cannabis plants left to their own devices are very unstable. So they said the plant will break down, it will not increase in potency. It kind of, in a sense, chews itself up and spits itself out after a little while. So you'll get these plants that are potent and then more potent and then more potent, and then they'll start to break down and die off. And so you have to kind of keep breeding them, so to speak. So here we have just a chart that shows very briefly what we've done in our potency in our state and how briefly it rocketed. And so I'm going to come back to this potency issue because it's more than the raw plant. But first I want to talk to you about what has happened with our youth. And I want to insert this in here because it's really important for you to understand that for decades in the world of prevention, any kind of risk prevention, we have known that the more harm our young people perceive in a certain action or activity or behavior, the less likely they are to do it, right? That makes so much sense. If they think smoking is harmful, they're less likely to do it. If they think they're very likely to get caught stealing, they're less likely to do it. But the less harm that they perceive, then the more likely they are to do something, right? Just sounds like common sense. So when they think something is less harmful, they're going to try it and jump in and go, it can't hurt me anyway. So, why not? So right now in the state of Colorado, we're seeing around 60% of high school students say marijuana is not harmful to me. What that tells me, and I'll tell you what, I mean, these numbers were like around 30%, 25 or 30% when I first started in the world of prevention around 2003, 2004. So they have completely flip-flopped to be totally the inverse of what they used to be. Because today, what kids see on social media, what they see on TV, what they hear in commercials, what they see on billboards, what they hear around them in the culture that we've created is, hey, it's just like a glass of wine, it's no big deal. So, whatever. What they tend to not hear is that it's far more harmful for them than it is for the average adult. So some of the ways that we know this data is there is an annual survey on substance abuse and health by the Substance and Mental Health Services Administration that we call SAMHSA. And it's combined with the Center for Behavioral Health. And what they do is an annual survey on risk behaviors. And they survey people 12 years of age and older. And so right now, 12 years of age is the starting age. And so what we see is our Colorado students in the pink or orange box versus the national average in the blue box. So when we look at kids 12 and older that have had marijuana use in the past month, the Colorado kids are at 17.4%, whereas the US is about 10. Perceptions of risk for smoking marijuana, 17% in that age group versus 24% in the US. So remember, our perception of risk is lower. So what does that mean? Our use rate is higher. Illicit drug use other than marijuana, we're a little higher, 4.7% versus 3.3%. Past month alcohol use, we're 10% higher. Another argument that was made when folks were considering whether or not to pass Amendment 64 was, look, if we pass this, opioids will go down and alcohol use will go down because people will choose this healthy alternative, quote unquote, healthy. So we can expect that alcohol use will go down. We have not seen that happen amongst our kids or our adults, actually. And then that we're 10% above the national average. Cigarette past month use, we're about at the national average, but look at our perceptions of the risk of smoking is still high. So again, you can see where they think the risk is high, the use is low. When they think the risk is low, the use is high, right? If that makes any sense. So that tells us something. Now we're going to look at some different charts and look at this a different way. We call the year that we went with unlimited medical marijuana in our state is 2010. So that's where you'll see a yellow arrow in these slides. And then you'll see in 2012 typically is where we went to what we call commercialization. So you'll see how the slides look here. So for past month use, ages 12 and older, the national average is 10%, whereas we are at 17.4%. Past month 12 to 17, so we're narrowing that window down instead of just saying 12 and up, which could include adults. We're narrowing it down to 12 to 17, and the national average is 7%, where we're at 9.9. You do see a spike over here. It went up, and then it went down, and the proponent said, oh, youth use is down, down, down. But now we're seeing it climb back up again. So it went down a little bit in over a period of about 18 months, and now it's climbing back up. Now, ages 18 to 25, Why this matters is these are our college age students, and these are our students, our young people that are coming into the workforce. So the national average for past month is 22.6 in the nation versus 34.4 in Colorado. Top law enforcement contacts with students. And I really want you to see these numbers here and pay attention to what we're actually saying with these numbers. So in the 2019-20 school year, so that was 19 and 20, and then remember that the end of 20, we went of this school year, 1920. So for like March, April, May, we went into lockdown. We were quarantined, okay? So we could say this is from like August 2019 to about March 2020. These are the numbers in the state of Colorado, according to the Colorado Division of Criminal Justice, for times that law enforcement had to get involved with students. So you see trespassing, theft, harassing, tobacco, liquor, dangerous drugs, and then you have assaults, and then you go to disorderly conduct and fighting, 790, and then look at the marijuana offenses, 976. And that doubles assaults. You could put a lot of these numbers together and you still have, in fact, you have fighting and dangerous drugs would be about maybe almost equal with marijuana alone. So that also tells us a story. And then we have another issue here with our suspensions, expulsions, law enforcement referrals, and it tells you percent of other drug violations versus the percent of marijuana violations. So you see suspensions, expulsions, and then law enforcement referrals. Of course, those numbers are much higher than they should be. Now, this is a little bit of old data, but I want to show it to you because it also tells us the story of dropouts. Now, we have changed the way that we collect this data, and we no longer collect it in the same way in our state. And that is why I don't have new data on this, because we stopped collecting it after the year 2014-15 school year. But I do think that what we see is we voted on legalization in 2012. It became personally legal 2013. Retail stores opened in 2014. And in that first year of retail, we saw our dropouts increase dramatically. And I also do think that that tells us the story as well. So now some good news, and I want to insert some good news here for sure. 43% of young people say their parents are still the most influential when it comes to drug messaging. Now, the difficult thing about this is you're not the majority, right? It's not 60 or 70 or 80%. So that could be a little bit discouraging. However, 43% is still a good chunk. And just because, there's another 7% out there that is, not listing you as number one, that doesn't mean they never listen or that you're completely cut off. However, all of you parents listening to me today are at a very unique time in the development of our history social constructs, where you are competing with social messaging. I mean, they're getting the majority of their values from social media. So one of the things that I would really encourage all of you is, I don't care how old your kids are. I don't care how much they cry and holler and throw fits and argue and try to convince you that it's not fair to let them on every social media platform known to man. I would limit that. I would severely limit it. I would monitor it. I would know every one of their passwords. I would not just give them free reign and free access, because what has happened is social media has replaced the parent as the dominant force in their lives. And it's whoever is the loudest voice on social media. So is it Kanye, or is it Kim, or is it, whoever it is? Probably Kanye's outdated now. They probably think he's an old man. So whoever is the young influencer for today, you can all tell by those references that I am now a grandma. But the reality of it is, those are your influences. So whoever the new next Miley Cyrus is the person who's telling your child what their values should be. So the more you limit that access and that content, the greater influence you will have. I would challenge you to communicate with your kids openly about drugs, drug use at age appropriate levels. I have done a presentation for Parents Challenge before on how to talk to your kids about drugs. And we talk about at age appropriate levels, discuss the fact that you only use medications that your physician prescribes. And you only use the prescription when your name is on the prescription bottle. And you only use that medication in that bottle with your name on it the way that the pharmacist says that you should use it according to the package instructions. You don't share it, and you dispose of it when it's completed, right? So we can do those things at a very young age. But to ignore the topic or think, they just know this automatically is a mistake that you can make very easily. And I'll share a little bit more about that with you at the end of our presentation. Set expectations and communicate those expectations. And then, of course, model healthy behaviors. It's so important that you as parents practice what you preach. You've all heard that thing of kids learn what or live what they learn, but they learn what you live. And so if you're saying one thing but doing another, they will model your behavior more than they will listen to what your words say, because their brains tell them that that is what makes more sense to them. And in a sense, that's the level of trust they have in you. They believe that if you're living your life this way, then it's okay for me as well. And that's the clearer message. So make sure that you're watching what all of these things look like to your children. Let's get into a piece of this that I think is very concerning, and that is marijuana-related exposures from 2009 to 2020. Total cases are in blue, so you see these go up. We saw a lot of spikes in 2015, as you can see. The first 2 years of legalization were very challenging, and then they went back down, and now they are almost back up to the highest range that you see here for all total exposure cases. And this means when people overconsume and they have reactions that we would consider to be poisoning. Okay, so we have a lot of that. We have people who take in products and they have bad reactions and they go to the emergency room, they call 911, they call EMTs, they have to receive treatment. This is what we're talking about here. The orange line are youth ages 0 to 18. So you can see the percentage that we have here of youth pertaining to all of those calls. It's about 2/3. Now, the number of marijuana only exposures by the Rocky Mountain Poison and Drug Center, you can see here again, numbers just spiking after a short decrease. And then broken down by age group for 0 to 8 years old. So I really want you to understand that 0 to 8 years old, what are they getting into that is causing these problems with exposure? And the blue is the dried plant. So the dried plant seems to be far less toxic, although there is still some toxicity there, far less. Edibles, 66% in 2020, where a child gets a hold of the gummy bears, the cookies, the candy, the sodas, the cotton candy, and all of those things. And we're seeing that exposure. And then 20% is other. What is the other? Well, I'll show you some things that other could be here momentarily. Now, I do want you to know about these exposures. I don't want to blow through them so quickly that you don't really fully, deeply understand and grasp what this means, because one of the things that I see happening quite a bit on social media are mommies groups, where mommies drop the kids off at school and then they get together and have edibles parties. That may seem shocking to you, or maybe it doesn't. I don't know what social media you're seeing, but that's something that's pretty hot and popular in our community. And so these moms will think, well, we'll have we'll get together and have some marijuana coffee cake and coffee or whatever we're having. And then by the time it's time to pick the kids up from school, everybody's good. Well, that's not always the case because of the digestive system. This stuff doesn't metabolize until it hits your liver. That process takes several hours. And then depending on the potency and how much you consume and whatnot, it could be impacting you when you're behind the wheel picking the kids up at school. So that's a very real concern. But the other concern is, are responsible adults who have children around or in their lives storing these things in a way that children cannot access them or get to them? Are they in a lock box? And a lot of people, they see this, they hear this warning. I think our Department of Health did a little program on it a couple of years ago about, lock it up. People go, yeah, whatever. But children becoming exposed to this is not just something that might be a little harmless or a little comical. Let me go back here to these numbers. When you look at marijuana related exposures by the Poison and Drug Center, I want you to be very clear on what happens here. We have seen children repeatedly who get a hold of edibles or they consume another product like eating dabs or wax or capsules or something like that. They stop breathing. They're rendered unconscious. They have to be admitted to the emergency room. If their stomach can be pumped, it is. They have to be intubated so that they can breathe. And then some of them are in a coma for days at a time. Now, I have myself personally gone to key players in the cannabis industry as a parent and a grandparent and said, this is irresponsible. What are you going to do to stop this from happening? Their patent answer to me for the last 9 years have been, the kids are fine. They come out of it, they're fine. We do not know yet if there's long-term brain damage for these incidents, but based on what I'm going to show you that happens to the developing brain, I'm skeptical. The other thing that I will say on this is that anything else that you would do to one of your children that would cause them to be resuscitated, intubated, unconscious, or in the hospital for a period of days would likely get you arrested and thrown in jail. But in our state, because it's marijuana and the kids are fine, we have a tendency to just keep walking. I think that's a travesty of justice for our children. And I want you all to be very aware that this is something you need to take seriously for the health and welfare of your children. Marijuana related exposures by age range, you can see 0 to 12 years old. Look at the 0 to 12 blue line and how much higher it is than 26 and older, which is the next line. The 26 and older includes a lot of our senior citizens that their adult children will come to them and tell them, hey, you should take these CBD products for your this or your that instead of all those pills you're taking. And we very often have senior citizens end up in the emergency room with psychotic breaks because they're scared, they don't know what is happening, and they got overdosed. The next age group under that is 13 to 17. And then 18 to 25 is the fourth group. So again, our children are at the greatest risk. And then now we're going to look at percentage of marijuana treatment admissions by age group into drug treatment centers. So this is data that we have from people who entered drug treatment. So you can see that in our state, age 26 and over is the highest rate of admissions that we've had, followed by 12 to 17 years, which dipped down a little bit and now is going back up. And then your 21 to 25 are the third line, very strongly correlated with that blue line. And then 26, well, I already said 26 and older is our 18 to 20 is the youngest or the lowest line. 18 and 20 is not necessarily the group that is always seeking treatment. They're still in their carpe diem stage. So unless they develop a really serious problem prior to that, or right after that, the 18 and 20-year-olds aren't really as prone to seek treatment because they're still taking in as much as they can. is kind of how we see it. Here we get a little bit more serious, and I want you to understand that there's another darker component here that we're seeing with our young people. Number of suicides in the state of Colorado with marijuana present in the toxicology report. Look at the numbers from 2009 to 2019. That is a significant jump that is quite alarming, and we should be very, very concerned about it. The percentage of suicides in which marijuana was present, again, let's see the percent. So this is the hard number, and then this is the percent of all suicides where marijuana was present in the toxicology report, and it's 29%. And then you see suicide toxicology by age group. So here you see groups of other drugs: cocaine, amphetamine, antidepressants, opioids here. You, of course, see a huge spike in alcohol. Look at these age groups. The toxicology reports, and again, remember, this is by suicide, death by suicide, ages 10 to 19. 10 to 19. Alcohol is 27%, 51% for the 20-year-olds, and then 51%. So when your age is 10 to 19, these two numbers reverse for alcohol and marijuana, if you see what I'm saying. So if it's age 10 to 19, marijuana is the preferred depressant of choice that may be leading to suicidal ideology. And then if it's ages 20 or older, then it's we'll flip those around. So yeah, 10 to 19. So you could see this is so deeply concerning. Once they're over 20, alcohol is the leading depressant. So again, we only have toxicology reports available for 60%, 62% of all the suicides from Colorado. Not all counties share that data. Not all test that data. Our counties are very individualized in our state. Our coroners are elected officials. They use different labs, and so some of them don't share that data. So this is just with 62% of the entire state's numbers represented. And then of all the suicides age 20 and older, percent positive for marijuana here. So again, that's 20 years and older. So then I want to take a look at overdose deaths. You know, a lot of people say you cannot overdose on this drug, but if we look at the terms of overdose, overdose doesn't just mean someone passed or died or lost their life. That's not the only definition for overdose. We would consider the poisonings to be overdose. We would consider psychotic breaks to be overdose. There are a lot of conditions on the spectrum that equate to overdose that do not mean the worst of the worst happened. So keep that in mind when you think about this. Can you overdose on nicotine? It is very hard. I mean, it can be done, but it is very, very hard to overdose on nicotine, very hard. And yet we know that it's one of the most dangerous substances in the world based on the numbers and the long-term disease and long-term causes of death. So why we don't group marijuana in that same group is just crazy, because we know that we have a lot of the same outcomes as we do for tobacco. But anyway, when you take a look at overdose deaths, we do hear regularly, and I've heard this in other states that are making a case to change their laws toward legalization. If you would just pass marijuana laws, you will get rid of all opioid deaths in your state. And that's the way to solve the opioids crisis, is to legalize marijuana, and then you will solve the opioids crisis. And apparently in the state of Colorado, that is very clearly not working for us, because we have seen both heroin and opioids deaths increase dramatically. So, I mean, those numbers are just devastating when you take a look at what they really mean. All right, and then we cannot neglect what is happening with drivers and car crashes, because many of you are parents of teens or preteens. And this is something that we all must be paying attention to. We have some of the highest traffic crashes in the nation where drugs are related. So if you take a look at what's happened in our state in just 2013 to 2020, you can see fatalities with operators testing positive for marijuana have doubled from 71 to 151. And so the percentage of total fatalities, and then of the 151 marijuana related traffic deaths that you see in 2020, 104 were drivers, 22 were pedestrians, 21 were passengers, and 4 were bicyclists. And those are the victims where the operator was tested positive. So I want you to understand that we're not doing a good job of educating about driving impaired. A lot of young people very much believe that it is safer to drive impaired with marijuana than not impaired. And I wish that since the last time I had spoken to you guys, I could say that had changed, but it has not. And that is a very scary thing. So again, knowing that your children will listen to you, please talk about this with them so that they understand that that's an unacceptable behavior, and they take their own lives and the lives of others into their hands whenever they operate under the influence. Number of positive cannabinoid screens from 2014 to 2020. And you can take a look at these numbers and see how they're increasing. It really is just kind of surprising. We don't test all drivers under the influence. We only test for cannabis for those that pass the alcohol test. And then we go further and test other drugs of abuse if they fail if they pass the alcohol test. So remember that if they fail the alcohol test, then we don't test for anything else. We just call it alcohol. So these are numbers that are where alcohol wasn't present and it was just drugs. So that's a pretty disheartening number there as well. Okay, let's get to what's trending, because I really want you to have a very clear understanding of what we are talking about with these potencies. So remember the potency chart I showed you and how some of those numbers were so high? Well, this is the culprit right here. If you're looking at this picture and you have no idea what you're looking at, pay close attention, because to your kids, pot is not just a little bit of weed. Pot is a concentrate. So within the first 18 months after weed passed legalization, concentrates became the #1 product in the state of Colorado. These are hyper potent products that are extracts, and they have to be extracted with either propane or butane. Now, if I have time at the end, I wanted to show you a website of some products that are retailed here in Colorado. But I want to make sure that I do the presentation before I start wandering around in other websites for a second. But one of the things I found very interesting on their labeling, and I think I have a picture of a label to show you here in a minute, but the labeling says that these products are organic, and the packaging says organic. Now, if you are extracting a product with butane or propane, and you're running it through that butane propane chemical mix, is that organic? I'm going to say no. And so, but people think that this is natural. Now, in our state, these products right here are considered weed. These are weed. In fact, the definition of cannabis in our rule to legalize included concentrates. And when we passed that law, most of us had no idea what we were talking about. So concentrates are called wax, dabs, hash, oil, honey oil. I'm sure you've seen signs for that if you're not engaging or partaking. This is a dab straw, and these are little portables. In order to consume dabs or wax, you have to have something that is super high heat, like over 300 degrees. So now they've created these little portable straws that make it super simple for anybody to grab these on the go and just use them instantly, and they heat up internally. So it used to be a larger, longer process where folks had to have a lot of equipment, Now they can just get their dab straw and move on. And these are very convenient for kids and for young people. Um, of course, the vapes are the #1 product for middle schoolers. So these are oil tubes that go in the vape pens that are indica, sativa, and a hybrid blend. One of the things I want you to understand about these high potency products is many of them are 60, 70, 80, 90% THC. The other thing I want you to understand about this, and I really want you to hear me. So I didn't kind of slow down because I want you to hear me. Indica is the strain of cannabis that calms you down, chills you out. Indica means in the couch. So when everybody thinks, what's the big deal? You're just going to smoke a little weed. They think of indica. That's the one where you get giggly and get the munchies and whatever. What's the big deal? Sativa, on the other hand, is very concerning because sativa amps you up, get your heart racing. It opens your brain capacity and gets you rushing and running and going at full force. High Times Magazine had some articles when these potencies started climbing over 60%. Writers were writing in and saying, and I used to subscribe so I could stay up on the news. I don't these days because now I have a 10-year-old grandson and, I want to be sure I'm protecting him. But writers were writing into High Times Magazine saying, now that the sativas have gotten over 60%, I can stop using cocaine to go to work every day and just use my sats because they get people racing so hard. I also want you to understand that within 6 hours after using high potency sativas, anyone prone to any kind of heart disease, heart palpitation, they are highly prone to heart attack and stroke. In fact, we have a lot of studies that show that in healthy men, ages 28 to 38, they're the highest risk group for heart attack after using these high potent sativas. So these things are no joke. There comes a price with having high potent products. It's a longer lasting high. It's a greater high in the brain. So it's a higher high, it's a longer lasting high, but then there are other side effects that come with it, particularly for kids, which I'm going to show you. So we need to pay very close attention. Of course, in the vaping world, you have the whole dual thing where kids can take these little USB ports, they just plug in. That's how they charge them, and then they can toke. And if you've never done a presentation on vapes and the dangers of vaping to kids and their lungs and the risk it puts them at, you need to be aware of these things. You need to research them, and you need to know that information. Of course, the edibles are always trending with kids. What kid would turn down a Nutter Butter, some Fruit Loops, a cupcake, some cotton candy, Rice Krispie treats, or any kind of cake or cookie? It's just much less the gummies. We did pass a law in our state that our gummies cannot be shaped like trees and flowers and moons and stars. However, there can still be gummy products. They can be just strips of gummy candy. And of course, we have fruit roll-ups. So just because it's not shaped like a bear doesn't mean the kids won't eat it, right? And of course, that law has still a couple of years before it goes into effect. But so what? If you can't find a gummy candy that you eat a cupcake or some Fruit Loops, of course, these are very attractive to children, not to mention things like pixie sticks and the soda, right? There are every choice under the sun to kids that you can find in any candy store on earth because the industry is here to make money. This is about commercialization. And so they're not going to stop the production of anything that looks attractive to children as the tobacco industry had to do. No, that's their future customer for life. So they are there to get your child as their customer, and you need to be very careful about guarding your children from this. This is one of the latest products that I'm very concerned about. This is called a distillate. As you can see here, it is 74.5% active THC. Now, this is very interesting. This product is sold by Grant Farms, PHARMS, Grant Farms. Here you can see this is a quote medical dispensary in Colorado Springs. Now, Colorado Springs is not supposed to be selling retail marijuana, only medical marijuana, okay? So we're only supposed to have medical marijuana here. But something I noted on this label, if you can see it, what is the CBD content of this product? The CBD content, if you can't see it, if it's very small on your screen, is 0%. CBD is supposed to be the product that is helping medically, not THC. So I find this very fascinating. This does come in a syringe, which also concerns me. It is not administered with any type of injection, but that's the popular notion. By the way, we had a marijuana retail store in Colorado that received a cease and desist order from the Food and Drug Administration for selling injectable THC and distributing it overseas. So that has happened, but it's not common and it's not on the market. It's, I mean, absolutely far too dangerous and unethical, but they've tried it. So you just need to know that this industry promotes anything that will take all of this to the farthest edge that they can. Now, when I looked up on this site, this is from Grant Farms, why people love to use distillates, because of the potency. It says if a distillate were to test at 99% purity, this would mean that in a 1 gram syringe, you have 990 milligrams of THC out of 1,000. I want you to recognize that we have decided in our state that a serving is 10 milligrams. A serving is 10 milligrams. So this, I mean, if you look at this, this is 100 servings, and you really only use these in a few usages. And then, you know, and again, for those using for purely medicinal, where there's no CBD, so I think that's kind of interesting. And then there are also several ways of consuming distillates, including vaporizing, topping off your joint, which means you would add it, like drop it in, or sublingually, drop it under your tongue, or as a suppository. I mean, for the love, I don't think we need to go down that rabbit hole, but that just kind of tells you that the industry purports, advertises, and promotes a variety of ways for people who use these products to use them in a clandestine fashion to hide it from you. So if you think those in your life, you know, well, I'm not seeing any joints, I'm not seeing any edibles, you may want to start looking in other ways, in other capacities, and in other storage areas, maybe convenient to the bathroom, so that these things are being consumed in a different way. Always a challenge. What are students doing with these different types of products? Well, with students who say they've used in the past 30 days, these are the percentages of the amount who ate it with edibles. So your 9th graders, you know, and again, this is 13, 15, and 17 data in Healthy Kids Colorado survey. We don't have the 19 data. I don't have the 19 data numbers on this yet. We often change the questions we ask on that data. So, but our 10th graders were the ones who ate it the most in 2017, right? So we still see that it's popular amongst the other ages. In fact, amongst 10th and 9th graders, more popular than 11th and 12th graders. So the average of who ate it is 36%. But then what about those dabs? What about those concentrates? Look at these numbers. This is what your juniors and seniors are doing. They're doing the dabbing rather than the edibles. So you're looking at your upperclassmen, they're getting more into dabs. I still think it's horrifying that our 9th graders are at 33%. So our average is 34% overall. One thing I want you guys to understand about some of these numbers when you look at them is there was a delegation from Sweden that came over here a few years ago to study our drug prevention programs in our schools and what we're doing and how effective they are. They came over here because they were deeply concerned that the use rates in their schools had gone up to 5%. And they did a tour of Denver public schools. And after that tour, I had met several of them when I had the opportunity to visit the United Nations. And so they invited us to a big dinner up in Denver so we could connect and see each other and discuss youth drug use. And they were just all in this very weird state. And I thought we would be so excited to see each other and pre-COVID, you know, hugging and how are you? And it's been a few years since I've seen you. How are you doing? It was this like super down environment. And so when we sat down to eat, we were like, so, you know, how is your visit going? How, you know, how are things? And they said, we are absolutely in shock because we went to Denver Public Schools today and we wanted solutions for drug prevention with our youth because we're concerned about our numbers going up to 5%, but the numbers in Denver are at 25 to 30% youth use. How are you even going to be functioning in 10 years when 25% of your kids are using drugs? And it was such a shock for us to see it through their eyes and to get that lens and that perspective and recognize, you know, what we are doing to our kids. In the 2018 NASDA survey, I thought these numbers were so striking. They said 45,000 more teens are regularly using marijuana than ever before in years before. Marijuana users are more likely to abuse opioids than non-users. Marijuana use disorder is increasing. Remember, that's the addiction that needs treatment. On average, 8,400 Americans ages 12 and up tried marijuana for the first time each day of 2018. That's 8,400 age 12 and up each day. First time use. That's 100%, 100 per day increase over previous study. First time users are typically between 12 and 25, and approximately 4.4 million people 12 and up had marijuana use disorder. I wanted to mention to you briefly when I talked about the withdrawal that I had seen. My niece is 30 years old. She tried dabs for the first time when she was 22 years of age. She was not a prior marijuana user, before that. At 22, she tried dabs. By 24, she was in the emergency room being resuscitated. She weighed 78 pounds because of marijuana related cyclical vomiting disease known as hyperemesis. She had to be resuscitated. She went to treatment. When she came out of treatment, she stayed clean for a little while, started using again, went back to treatment. We did this for several years. Last year, in fact, a year ago this month, at 29 years of age, she had been in and out of treatment centers with severe psychotic breaks 8 times in our state, and the state of Colorado has declared her a permanently disabled adult incapable of caring for herself because of how mentally declined she is from her dabs use. This is no joke, folks. And marijuana is her only drug of choice, although she has gotten product that was laced with cocaine on many occasions. We've had dispensaries shut down in our state for having product laced with mold, mildews, aspergillus, all kinds of things that are out there. But please guard your kids because this stuff is no joke. 1 in 6 teens become addicted. I actually believe that this number is much, much higher. However, we are not able to ethically study the concentrates because they do so much harm to people that the only thing that we can study are kids who are already using the leaf smokable form. We cannot even study at this point those concentrated products. So we're still saying 1 in 6 teens and 1 in 6 to 10 adults. I have to tell you that I believe it's much, much higher than this. I don't for one second actually believe that this is the real number, but it is the data that we have scientifically based on the last study. There is a high association between the level of cannabis use and the risk of psychosis and psychotic break. These are 571 references, 18 studies, over 66,000 adults. So we're not talking about a few people, we're talking about significant numbers. Daily use of high potency marijuana increases psychosis risk by 5 times. That would be where my niece falls. Weekend use only nearly triples the risk. High potency marijuana use alone was responsible for 24% of psychosis cases.